This is an 8-iron, and it's a dead shank.
Wow.
Way right.
Oh,
Takes
dead
a
shank.
hop off the path.
You got to be kidding me. Very tough pitch shot right here. You got to hit it into the hill. One hop up and bite, and it's in.
Kind of like that.
Well, I would like to welcome to the Sub 70 podcast Mike Hocking of OCM Design Firm from Australia. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time today. But looking forward to this conversation, especially with the news coming out of Medinah, and we'll get there in a little bit. But thanks for taking the time. Truly appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. No problem, Jason. Nice to be here.
Well, I was going to ask you, what's sort of for the people who don't know, maybe the history or backdrop of OCM, and how has the firm evolved over time, and kind of working with a legend on the PGA Tour, with Jeff Ogilvy and all that stuff. Sort of, how did it start, and how did you guys get to where you're at?
Sure. So I guess Ashley and I, so the M in OCM, we started working together in 2000, so we've kind of worked together for 22 years. And Jeff and I have known each other since we were kids. We all grew up in Melbourne. Jeff and I kind of grew up around we all grew up around the Sandbelt courses, really. And he and I played a bit of competitive golf together. He was always better than I, naturally, but yeah, we sort of mixed in similar circles. So we knew each other for some time. Ashley and I had worked in design, and then in 2010, Jeff had sort of shown some interest in maybe getting involved in some sort of capacity. So we basically started the company, the new company then. Yeah, and when we've kind of, I think, with most design firms, the natural progression is, you start off doing sort of some smaller plans and renovations and what have you that are kind of local to you. And we've done a lot of work around the Melbourne area and on the Sandbelt. Then you get a bit more sort of national recognition, and then sort of hopefully later you get more sort of internationally known. And that's kind of the way it's happened with us. We work at a lot of the big clubs around Australia, in all the states, and then maybe 5 or 6 years ago we got a project in China. After looking at a few different jobs, sort of through Asia, it was a fantastic job in Shanghai for a big company there, and it was renovating a golf course. And then in America, we pitched on, actually, there's a course in, you would know it, Trinity Forest, just in South Dallas. Yep. And I kind of through a friend, we pitched on that and got very close. They really liked our routing. But then Bill and Ben, sort of, I guess at the 11th hour, decided to take a look at it. And, and it's a fairly, natural choice to go with those guys, the, leading firm one of the leading firms in the world. And of course, Ben being a Texan. But we stayed in contact, and I heard through a friend that Shady Oaks were looking to renovate their course, and I contacted the same guys at Trinity Forest, and they just happened to be standing next to Bill Corr, and Bill was very good friends with the pro at Shady Oaks, and he sort of put a call in and suggested that they take a look at us, and I flew over and met Jeff at Shady Oaks, and we spent a couple of days there, and that was kind of our foot in the door into America. We ended up winning that job. We completed the renovation there just in the lead up to COVID. So I kind of left Texas in about March 2020. And then, yeah, that project went very well, and that kind of then led to Medinah, which has in turn led to a couple of other opportunities in America, which we're sort of hoping to announce in the next couple of months.
Shady Oaks being an iconic place, especially with, association with Mr. Hogan, right?
Yeah.
When the club gets to a point where they want to, is it called a restoration or a renovation, or I'm assuming they wanted to bring it back to some of the original architectural lines. Was that correct? Of where they was it change it, or was it bring it back to its former glory per se? What was sort of the direction they went on that?
Shady was probably more of a renovation, I guess, rather than a restoration. we felt that it was a lovely course, beautiful oaks, live oaks sort of scattered around the property. Interestingly, Hogan warned Marvin Leonard, who developed the course. He kind of has an interesting history. He obviously built Colonial, and Colonial had been very successful, and a small group of members suggested to him to build a smaller club in a little bit further out in Fort Worth, and then he started looking at property, and Hogan kind of suggested that the property at Shady Oaks was too steep and too rugged. But fortunately, he went ahead with the project because it is pretty hilly, but it's dramatic, and particularly for Texas, which is kind of known as being a fairly flat, a lot of flat terrain. So there's some really interesting kind of almost old barrancas running through parts of the property, a lot of elevation change. And whilst there are elements that we restored, we felt the course could be improved. It lacked a bit of strategy. There were quite a few holes where bunkers had sort of been positioned, say, on the outside of dog legs or, well into the rough. Greens that didn't necessarily sort of favour, an approach from one particular side of the fairway or the other. And I guess the further we kind of went into the project, the less, the more open the club were to changes. But probably at the very start, they were a little bit more attached to the current course and felt that, they wanted to retain certain elements. But the further we went into it, the more open to change they were. And very early on, we actually suggested working on the Little Nine, which is it's actually where Mr. Hogan practiced. It was kind of a practice fairway in the middle of the course that had evolved to a kind of a rudimentary short course. There were 9 pretty simple greens and 1 or 2 bunkers out there, and our eyes lit up when we saw that, because we've pitched that to so many different clubs over the years. This idea of a kind of a free-form short course, somewhere you could play 9 formal holes, or you could go out with your friends and almost just pick the hole. The winner chooses the next hole.
Yeah.
Whether it's you play some holes as par 4s or par 3s, and it's also kind of the ultimate practice facility, because you can practice every shot from a 300-yard drive through to a 2-foot putt. So that made a lot of sense to start there, and it was a nice chance too for the club and us to get to know each other, for them to see how we work, to work in with the ground staff and the guys on the ground as well. So when that turned out to be very successful, that kind of, I guess the gloves came off a little bit on the golf course itself.
Was it getting too heavily tree lined too, where there was no options off the tee, no width, no angles? It's a sort of paint by numbers golf course where you had to hit it from here to there, then there to there, without having much, I don't know, what do you call it, variety, or you're kind of pigeonholed into one style of golf?
That's right, yeah. I mean, there were a few factors. I mean, there were certainly a number of holes where bunkers really didn't confront the golfer. There wasn't really a decision to be made. They were way off to the sides of the fairway, so they would tend to catch just a bad shot. Whereas, so often the best placed bunker is the one that's positioned just where you want to hit your ball. So you kind of have to make a decision, do I lay up short of it, try and slide it by it, try and carry it? What do I do? The course had got very narrow as well, even though the corridors were actually quite wide. So it was a hard course for the average golfer, but it's never going to be unfortunately, there's just not enough length to make it a tour-length golf course.
It's a members golf course. It's a members
golf.
Yeah.
It's just, I think if you really want to stretch it, you might almost get it to 7,000 yards, but it's not quite. It's a little bit under that. And then, as you said, trees. There are a few holes. There's actually a river that kind of runs through. It dissects 14 and 15, which are consecutive par 5s. And on the 14th, they'd planted trees over the years alongside the water. So it would be like planting trees in front of the creek on the 13th at Augusta.
Yeah.
So it's like it kind of took away this probably the best looking shot on the course, where you're hitting your second shot all across water if you wanted to go for the green in 2. And it sat on a really nice diagonal, so the average golfer could kind of play well away from the water but get a harder angle into the green, or if you wanted to take on the water and it came off, you got a reward. So there was some sort of kind of simple strategic opportunities to improve holes. And it was interesting. We did do a bit of removal, but typically it was removing the trees that had been planted. It wasn't the original old oaks. And as soon as we did that, it started really opening up just how great the property is, because there was like a big rocky sort of shelf, for instance, on one hole, a big drop-off that was totally overgrown. We didn't even know what this ground was like, and it was only once we removed all the clutter and all of the overgrown sort of vegetation, it opened up this incredible bit of ground, which we ended up sort of taking advantage of. We were able to sort of slide. It was a par 3 hole, and we were able to slide the green right over next to this huge drop-off and kind of cut some bunkers into the rocky ground. And so, yeah, it was kind of we knew some of these holes would be good, but as we started getting into the construction, started clearing areas, it really highlighted even more opportunities to take advantage of the site.
You're preaching to the choir. I've had heated debates at the. I'm fortunate enough to be a member at Kishwaukee Country Club, which is a club built in 1901. Same architect who originally designed Medinah. And excuse me,
from Bendelow.
Yeah, it's a Bendelow, and you can see the original lines, and then some genius in the 60s or 70s, when they wanted to make every golf course look like a U.S. Open, they planted the secondary trees. And the lines, we were talking about it just gets one-dimensional. It turns into one-dimensional golf. You have to hit it to there. You get, you got roots potentially causing problems. And it's like, I try to show the guys, like, they want the golf course because it's always been this way, that's how it's supposed to be, the older guys. I'm like, but there's no variety. There's no angles. Yeah. There's no width. And then the course, the rough has no, rough really around it because there's no sunlight. You can see the new trees versus the old trees. And it'd be so much better if they yanked it. So you're preaching to the choir of what I would love to do at my home club if I could just take a magic eraser and get rid of a bunch of them. But where did architecture go wrong? Where they started saying, let's plant. Was it everyone wanted their golf course to look like a U.S. Open from the 60s and 70s? So they put fast-growing trees and not realizing the consequences of what they were doing. It seems like there's so many courses that lost their golden age, air quotes, sort of character to making it look like a miniature U.S. Open golf course from 1986. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, it's certainly not unique, that kind of evolution that you described. Yeah, I mean, from a strategic point of view, you just can't build strategy into holes without width. It's such a key component. The idea that you can penalise someone for being on one side of the fairway or reward someone on the other side if the fairway is only 25 yards wide is just, it's impossible. And, you look at all the great old Golden Age courses, you look at the old aerials, and typically they were at least 40 yards wide, 50 yards wide, 60 yards wide. So they were nice, big, wide courses. I remember talking with Tom Doak years ago about it, and he thought one of the big changes that had occurred was the advent of automated irrigation, because way back in the 30s and 40s, when irrigation systems were first being looked at, they were single row sprinklers down the middle of the fairway.
Yeah,
and of course they would only throw 30 yards wide.
Right.
So a lot of these courses that were 60 yards wide almost shrunk overnight. And then so suddenly all the bunkers that were in the fairway were suddenly in the rough. And then you had these big expanses of rough that's like, well, what do we do with them? So trees were planted, and it just kind of started tangenting this tangent off, the original design intent to this, narrow, confined, restricted golf course. And we've sort of got to the generation we're in now where architects are starting to address that. But a lot of that damage was done, I think, through the 40s and 50s and 60s.
Yeah, like I said, it looks like a miniature U.S. Open. The other thing that drives me nuts is we have a beautiful little creek running through our backside, then they double hazard it, where they planted a bunch of trees. I'm like, in front. So now you've got this tree overhanging part of the fairway that's overgrown, and there's a creek down that side behind the tree. It's like, you don't need both, right? Take the tree out. It'd be a better sight line. It shortens the hole, so there'd be a risk reward if there was some width, and there's water there. So if you pull it too much, you're already in trouble. They seem to do a lot of double hazarding too. Trees in front of bunkers or stuff like that. It's like, how, see the original architecture from Bendelow, what he was trying to do. Like, it's not that. It's this.
No, and unfortunately, you don't need a permit to plant a tree, but quite often you need one to remove it. And so a lot of well-meaning people over the years, have seen a gap or, an opportunity to, so-called strengthen the golf course, or whether it's to preserve the par, or because someone went around there in a low score and, they were just sort of over-treed for a number of decades. And, once the tree gets to 30 or 40 feet or 50 feet, it becomes a big deal to remove it.
Yeah, it's expensive too, right?
Yeah. And you just don't notice, the incremental growth, I think, with vegetation too. Like even guys that know what they're looking at, if you're at the same course for 10 years or 20 years, you just don't see that kind of weekly, monthly, yearly growth. And just over time, holes just get further and further away from the original intent.
What do you think? I mean, you said they had width and they had strategy from Scotland, from the guys who did Golden Age, the icons of it.
Yeah.
And in these courses, yes, some of them aren't long enough to have a tour event, but a good amateur can still play and really enjoy, a classic Seth Rayner. They've stood the test of time. What did those guys, or how did they do that back then? Imagine without all of the aids modern architecture has of, aerials and stuff. They sort of just did it. And it's still my favorite. If you go play Yeaman's Hall Club or Chicago Golf Club, or name all of them, right? Like a Seth Rayner golf course, if it's restored or brought back to the original lines, it's just they're masterpieces, and they're 100 years old. Like, what did those guys, in your opinion, when you go see something like that, how the hell did they do that? And then how the hell is it still so good 100 years from now where you're like, that's just the greatest experience ever of walking the Yeamans and playing it? Like, it's just brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, it was such an interesting period because they'd just come out of that era, that sort of Victorian era, late in the 1800s, when the sort of, I guess, the purpose of bunkers was seen as being to penalise bad shots. So, a lot of those penal courses, bunkers were either straight across a fairway or down the sides of the fairway, and it's almost like the worse the shot, the worse the hazard would be, or the worse the penalty was. And Rayner and Mackenzie and Tillinghast and Thomas and, all that group of Golden Age architects that we kind of refer to them as today, saw the game differently. They were quite revolutionary because, they sort of said essentially that, the game's hard enough for, this is all backwards, the game's hard enough for the average golfer. We need to make it easier for them and harder for the good golfer. So the hazard should be placed exactly where you want to hit your ball to, and if you play away from that spot, the shot to the green becomes a little bit harder, and that was kind of where strategic golf was born with those guys. I think they were incredibly creative, and I think some of the reason we had these so many interesting designs is that they were still sort of finding their way. They were being really creative. They didn't have this notion that's weighed upon them of what a great golf course is or what a course should be. And, all these sort of preconceived rules, so to speak, that people get way too hung up on, like, returning nines and par 72 and 4 par 5s and 4 par 3s. And, oh, no, you can't do this. You can't have a blind shot, or you can't do this. And toning greens down and the distance from, a putting surface to the surrounding bunker. There's a period there where people want to run a triplex mower between a green and a bunker, but all that does is water down the purpose of the bunker. You want to cut the bunker as close to the green as possible. And so I think we kind of got in our own way a little bit there for a period, and it stifled people's creativity. But yeah, certainly, I think the last 20 years has seen a resurgence to I think that's why we've seen so much restoration work.
Yeah. Yep.
People are rediscovering the genius of these architects and wanting to see all of these great courses returned.
I agree, and I think if you get the opportunity to play it, and if you do get to play it, they're just so enjoyable. It's so much fun. Of having some variety and width, and one day that bunker might be in play, and one day it might not, based on the wind. And you're like, how did Mr. Rayner know to put that there? It's just genius, of the thought process of how you then play that hole, and it makes you think. They did a wonderful job of I think their bunkering from that era is just superb. You have to think your way around the golf course a little bit, right? It's not just hit to that one point. It's okay, exactly what you're saying. Do I take this risk reward on? Can I carry this today? Do I need to play conservative and just make a par here and get out of Dodge, and I'll be more aggressive on the downwind hole? But then on the downwind hole, there might be something from the previous day you didn't notice or see that's now in play. But they're fair.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes the decisions are confusing, which is brilliant. You stand there and the wind's coming from a different direction or the pin's in a different position, and you might have your hand on 5 or 6 clubs. You're just not sure what to hit. And I think that's one of the great signs of the signs of a great hole, is that it's not always an obvious decision. It's not just, that was one of the issues at, say, Shady Oaks. There were so many of the par fours, you never once thought about what to hit. You just you just grab the driver and hit away and just try to hit it as long and as straight as you possibly could. Whereas, a sign, I think, of, so many great two-shotters is that indecision. What do I do?
Yes, and then making it not the same every day. Wind can change, elements can change. Yeah,
not making the same. Yeah, not making every hole that same decision. There's light and shade between, across the whole golf course.
Exactly. Well, I'm outside Chicagoland, so Medinah is iconic. So is Medinah 3. So, I'm going to start off with a tough one here for you. And you don't have to throw anybody under the bus. But they just redid it before the Ryder Cup in 08, 09. I knew they took out, 1,500 trees out there because it was a shit show before they did the Reese Jones doing it, in the sense that you had to limit play, and it's way overgrown, right? So they improved that side of it. So they do this big renovation project. Ryder Cup's out there. What caused these guys again now to say, hey, it's only been 15 years, let's redo it? Was it the guys shooting 25 under par? Cutting dog legs? Was it just the membership saying this course is one-dimensional? What did they kind of, lack of a word, I'm asking you to throw anyone under the bus, I said, but get wrong? What went wrong when they redid this 15 years ago? And then how are you guys going to try to, make it as good as you guys can make it, or what's the sort of vision of it going forward?
Yeah. I suspect there was a range of issues that kind of threw up the idea of, a potential redesign. Purely from a infrastructure point of view, there's no drainage system out on course 3. So every time it rains, it kind of floods. And one of the things that I think we all aspire to is firm playing conditions.
Yep.
It's one of the keys to build strategy into holes. It's hard to do that if the greens are like puddings, and you can even if you're out of position, you can hit a 9-iron and the ball's going to stop. So there's not really a decent drainage system out there. I think the better players, it's kind of an example of what I was talking about before. One of the challenges, I think, at all of the, at any tournament level golf course is you're trying to make it fun and interesting and fair for the average golfer, but challenging and interesting for the game's elite. And it had become pretty obvious that it was sort of doing the opposite to that. Course is incredibly difficult for the average golfer. Tight fairways, pretty penal water that you have to play across. And yet the really elite, the game's elite, are shooting 24 under and 25 under. And it's a long golf course.
But not when you're cutting dog legs over, and all of a sudden a 460-yard hole is now a driver and a flip wedge. I can't do that. They could, correct. And all of a sudden now it doesn't even matter. And the greens were so soft. You can't. I don't care if the golf course was 7,800 yards. If they can cut dog legs with soft greens, they're going to shoot a million under. There's just no way around it.
That's right. And holes like that, holes like 9 and 11 and 16, those sort of sharp dog legs with trees on the corner, had done exactly that. I mean, they didn't defend the hole against the long hitters. They just hit it across the corner, yet they're impossible for the short hitters who couldn't reach the corner and faced an impossible second behind a wall of trees.
Right.
So, and then I guess in the background there was probably some thoughts about the course ranking. And I think seeing all the other work that's been going on in the last decade was probably a factor too. So many of the great old country clubs had been restored or were going through some sort of renovation again. And so I think sort of a range of issues, but simple things like, even renovation aside, there are some fundamental things there that really need to be addressed. The greens suffer agronomically. They're very, very small. There's not a lot of kind of access and egress points, drainage system, irrigation system. So it's kind of, there are some things that really need to be addressed, whether or not we were in there as the architects or not. So it's probably a range of issues, not one particular issue, I would suggest.
Lots of trees coming out too.
Right, sorry.
Are you guys going to be pulling lots
there's
out?
some spots. Yeah, there are. I mean, not lots, but holes like those dog legs that I was talking about. Not so much 16, because we can actually improve that hole by removing the 15th. We can actually get that tee on 16 in a much better position. So you're sort of hitting down the hole rather than across the corner.
Yeah.
But holes like 9 and 11 are difficult to kind of improve without addressing the trees. If you look at all the great dog legs of the world, they pretty much all are defended by ground hazards on the inside corner. And, you have that decision we were talking about before. Mm-hmm. There's very few examples of great dog legs where there's trees kind of on the corner of the dog leg. And look, fortunately, from a historical point of view, those trees had been planted. They weren't original trees. So it makes the argument a little easier when you're talking about kind of trying to restore some of the original intent back from the 30s. I think there's less attachment to the trees when you can kind of demonstrate that this has actually moved away from the original concept. And fortunately, they're not the beautiful. Those old oaks that are dotted around the property are unbelievable. And fortunately, we're preserving, as many of those, well, really all of those throughout the property. There's a little bit of removal in a couple of spots, but we're not going to lose that feel of what kind of makes Course 3 feel so good. That big scale, the lake, the oaks, the undulating terrain. It's still going to feel like Medinah, but the holes are going to be changed a little.
Is it a tough project in the sense that they're still? I'm assuming, I don't know this to be a fact, but I'm guessing they still want to hold professional tournaments there, so it has to be able to be playable for the members, hopefully fun, but when the best in the world potentially come out there, it's got to be able to play how the club wants it to sort of play. So is that where, like, having Jeff helps a lot, where he can look at this from the professional aspect and look at what's going on and get that part of it, while you guys can also still try to make it fun for the members, and even for a guy who's a 15 handicap to not get his teeth kicked in at Course 3. Is that a tough balancing act?
It is. It's become tougher in the last few decades because of the technological advances in golf equipment. But the professional game and the average golfer's game have never been further apart. Certainly easier back in the Persimmon days when just the sheer length of an average golfer versus a pro was perhaps a little closer together. But that is one of our great challenges. And I think you can if you look at some of the courses around the world that do that very well, and look at some of the features of those courses. Some really great examples are actually local here to us on the Sandbelt. They're probably some of the most playable championship courses in the world because they're wide. They don't distort them by narrowing the fairways leading into a tournament. They keep the width, but they're brilliant green complexes. And they'll use tilt, they'll use the hazards themselves, plus they're firm. So the fairway might be 50 yards wide, but you have to be in the left quarter to get the angle to a particular pin. And every yard you're away from that spot, the shot to the green just becomes increasingly harder and harder and harder. So certainly trying to get a little bit more width out there helps the average golfer. Improving the green complexes puts more of a premium on position back in the fairway. We want to improve the relationship between, say, the putting surface and the surrounding bunkers. One of the things we don't like about air quotes here, parkland, US parkland style courses is quite often you see bunkers in the rough. You see that 5 yards of rough between the fairway and the fairway bunkers, or the 5 yards of rough between the putting surface and the bunkers. And we look at this because in Australia, we try and build our bunkers hard up against the putting surface. In some instances, on the Sandbelt, we actually have no collar. So we've got putting surface right to the edge of the hazard. Now, That's not possible at Medinah just because of the soil, but we can certainly get it like a foot away.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you've got more interesting pins. You know, you can tuck a pin 10 foot behind a bunker, and you can slope the putting surface away from the bunker to the pin. So suddenly, you know, you're out of position. You've got an incredibly hard shot across a bunker with the green sloping away. So for a professional, it's making the course harder. More short grass around the greens making it harder, because at the moment, you know, they just take dead aim. If the pin's tucked in the corner, if they know there's rough around that green, they're not worried about missing the green, because the ball's only going to finish a couple of yards off it.
Correct.
But suddenly, if you've got shaved banks, you know, and missing the green means the ball's running 30 yards away, 25 yards away, or finishing in the bunker, suddenly it's putting a little bit more pressure on them back in the fairway to hit to position, or to think about, well, you know, what if I miss this? Where do I want to miss it? You know, and they're not new ideas; they're kind of golden age ideas, but I think they've just been lost over time.
Wasn't it fun to watch the brilliance of Tiger at that, you know, the President's Cup, of playing, you know, of the strategy he used, and just, you know, meticulously kind of taking the golf course apart. And yet some bombers were like a little bit like, what do I do here? I mean, I'm a little, oh man, I got this 52-yard shot, but I am kind of in trouble on this. And it just shows like the brilliance of mind and strategy for those guys who really played well that week. And it was so refreshing to watch that a little bit. I think the area you're at, I haven't been over there to play it, but from the guys I've talked to said it may be the best region in the world of golf courses. That Sandbelt region in Australia might be as good as anywhere in the world. Is that a pretty fair statement?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's, you know, one of the wonderful things too is that they're accessible. You know, they're not overpriced. They're not, you know, pretty much anyone can join them as long as you know 4 or 5 members. You know, it's very, very accessible golf. We have a lot of rounds. We typically have more rounds on the Sandbelt than, say, the top end country clubs. They might play 45,000 rounds per year on each of the Sandbelt courses. And it's pretty cheap golf, but brilliant maintenance, some of the best greens in the world. And yeah, it's fascinating to watch someone like Tiger, both last year or the President's Cup, but also sort of a decade ago when he won at Kingston Heath, which is my home club. You know, he was just, you could sort of see his mind ticking over, you know, as he played the course. One or two of the days he wasn't playing that well, but he just knew where to miss it. He totally understood the golf course and understood the strategies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if he played on the Sandbelt every week, God, I'd hate to think what his record would be. He'd almost be unbeatable, I think.
Have you been a member at Kingston Heath for a long period of time?
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, they're in Peninsula Kingswood, which is, of course, we renovated as well. I sort of play it. Well, I'm a member at both of those. But yeah, I've been at Peninsula for 30 years and Kingston Heath for probably 10 or 15.
So you've played Kingston Heath 9 million times. Is it still, you know, once again, I've heard it's one of the best golf courses in the world. Does it still grab your interest to today when you're out there playing, that you may still have a shot you may have not exactly ever had before? Does it still make your mind think? Is it still, when you're done playing around, are you like, this is just brilliant? Like, it's just brilliant.
Totally. Yeah, and because for those reasons we were talking about before, I mean, so a hole like the third there is a short par 4 built on not very good land. You know, it's just pretty flat ground. It wasn't an obvious hole. And but it's just brilliant. It's all through great design and great construction. And it's constantly changing. It's 330 yards. You can drive it if you want, or if you're lucky. But anything from kind of a 6-iron through to a driver off the tee is a legitimate play. And so, it just changes all the time. Depends on the wind, depends on how you're playing, where the pin is. And there's a bunch of holes there like that. So it just keeps you engaged. Doesn't matter how many times you play it, it keeps you engaged. And whereas I guess, you know, one of the criticisms of you know, somewhere like perhaps Medinah is that you're not getting those decisions aren't there all the time. You know, it's very predictable how the ball's going to bounce, where you're going to finish, and the sort of shots you're going to hit off the tee. And that's what we'd really like to change as part of the renovation is increasing that interest and that idea of, you know, variety and strategy, of course.
Well, if you're bored with the project and want to come out to Kishwaukee Country Club, about 50 miles west of here, come with a bulldozer, some dynamite. We'll get rid of some trees and go back to the original Bendelow lines. I would be happy. Yeah. It's always just such an interesting debate of like we can have this conversation. I totally understand where you're coming from. It's like some of the guys are like, I know I just want it really hard. I just want it like tree lined and brutally difficult. I'm like, but why? It's so much better when you talk about that option, like this great little 330-yard hole, and yet you might play it 5 different ways, and you might make a double bogey out of nowhere. You're like, oh shit, where did that just come from? Or the next round you might make a birdie, and it's just right. Those are the greatest holes that give you that options variety, makes you think, and you can make a birdie or it can bite you in the ass if you start playing it wrong from the start and you're out of position, and then all of a sudden it's just like, how in the world did I just make a 6 there? You did.
Yeah,
that's you're going the right way.
Yeah, and the short holes are sometimes the best. I mean, we love kind of short par 3s, drivable par 4s, reachable par 5s because they're not out of reach for the mere mortal. You know, one good swing on a 130-yard par 3 and even a 20 marker can have a birdie. But yeah, the best golfers in the world can be humbled. You know, if you use all of some of those design characteristics we were talking about before, I mean, they can walk off with a bogey or a double. That's kind of the perfect hole, whereas you're never going to see that on a 500-yard par 4.
Yes, and it's like I've said this. I've never gotten to play Augusta National, but I played there's a golf course in Dallas, Texas called like Tour 18, so it has copycats of the greatest holes in the world, right? Yeah. And if you didn't know you're playing a copycat golf course, the 3 best holes on that whole golf course are Amen Corner. The little par 3 with the way the green is, right? The par 5 is brilliant, right? You're on the edge and you're like, oh, geez, do I go with this? Or I lay it up and I've got a downhill sort of lie to this. It's just brilliant, right? And all 3 of the holes in Amen Corner have all of those elements. It's with a short little par 3. And if you didn't know they were the Augusta-style holes, you would just be, that is just genius, whoever put those 3 holes together. Because every one of those holes you're thinking with options. Yeah. How aggressive do you want to get? Right. And to me, that's how golf should be played. I'm so looking forward to seeing what you guys can. I'm so excited to see Medinah. Fortunate, we know some members out there. So when the renovation happens, I can't wait to get back out there and see what you guys are going to do with it. Because it sounds like it's just going to be, you're going to preserve what makes it Medinah, but kind of bring some of those elements that we both seem to enjoy in golf into it, which I think will be so much better.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it kind of describes the aim very well. So.
Well, I was going to ask you this too. We'll take the sand belt out of it because you get to play them all the time. But if you were going to play, 2 or 3 other golf courses that you've seen around the world, was there a couple others that are just absolutely brilliant in your mind, and what makes them great?
Yeah, I think in terms of regions probably. I love Long Island obviously New York. The kind of the Heathland region just around London, West Coast of America, and the Sandbelt. They're kind of my 4. Well, and the region around St Andrews in Scotland. So, I mean, St Andrews is probably my sort of, I guess, hand on heart favourite golf course. If I had to play one course for the rest of my life, I would play there. And some of that, I think, is the historical factor leaking in. Walking the fairways, thinking of old Tom and right back to Mary Queen of Scots, and I constantly am amazed by that course because it was found. It was never really designed. I mean, the bunkers evolved, the routing evolved, and no one really designed it, so to speak. I mean, old Tom did a few things, and some minor changes have occurred, but essentially it's the same landscape it was 400 years ago, and yet it might be the most interesting strategic golf course in the world. I'm constantly amazed by that. So I'd probably put that in there. I do love that sort of National Golf Links, Shinnecock Hills kind of part of Long Island, New York, Fry's Head. And I'll throw in Cypress Point on the West Coast as well. I'd be pretty happy with playing my golf at those 3 areas.
Have you been out to the Sandhill region of Nebraska in the United States?
I have. So Ashley and I were in the States for about 8 weeks last year. So in kind of July, August. We came through, we played Sand Hills and came through that whole region. Went down and popped into Prairie Dunes again. I do enjoy Prairie Dunes. It's a fantastic golf course as well. And, yeah, I mean, those sand hills just continue forever. It was much bigger than I expected. I wasn't thinking they stretched on for just that far. I thought it was going to be a much smaller pocket of, great ground and here's sand hills, and then you get back to the flat farming ground. But that took me by surprise. You could fit 100 golf courses out there if you really want.
Yeah, there's a lot of raw land for cows to graze out there. But yeah, you can drive in that area and you can almost just see holes, right? You can be driving down the road and be like, there's a little par 3. You could put the tee box right there. There's your green. There's your blowout bunker. I mean, it's just amazing how good that land is for golf courses. It really is. All the best golf courses, for the most part. If you can get sand for your base, there seems to be a correlation for the more sand you got, the better the golf course normally is.
Oh, yeah. And you can see how, it took so long and there were so many different possibilities at Sandhills, for instance, because you could pretty much just go in any direction and find golf holes.
I think
the property was so big.
Yeah, they had over 100 holes, I think, to pick from. And the toughest part was narrowing it down to 18.
Yeah, and I think Bill went back to the owner and said, I want to purchase the land next door. There was a little pocket that he wanted to buy.
That's right.
And he's like, your kid, we've got 1,000 acres or whatever it was. You want to buy more?
Yeah.
There's not enough for you. And I think they did it. They did a land swap, I have a feeling, with the neighbour, where they got this little bit of extra land and gave him another chunk that they didn't need.
Yeah, that place is a masterpiece. It really is. They did such a good job with that golf course, and it's so fun to play. I've been fortunate to play it. It might be my favorite in the United States. It's up there. It's really, really, really good.
Yeah, and they nailed it. It's just got such a great vibe too. That's one of that sort of culture is so hard to create. At a golf course, you can build the best course in the world, but if that sort of vibe and culture's not there, it doesn't quite have it. But it was amazing, just the feeling of once you get into the cabin there and just on the course, and just had an amazing feel to it.
Will you guys at some point with the work you're getting be opening an office in the United States, you think? Is that on the radar where you're going to have a place over here as well, as it sort of seems like your one job's leading to the next job, sort of in the States here?
Yeah, it could. It's probably more where ideally we would have a group of some shapers over there that kind of we start to have a relationship where they can kind of go from one course to the next. That's probably the area. I mean, we get used to the travel. We do have an office, or we've got a small office in Arizona, which is sort of linked to the management company that used to, or that looks after Jeff over there. So we do sort of have a base we can use in Scottsdale, but the key for us is more that shapers and perhaps project manager that we can use on some of these projects, because it's tricky to bring guys out from Australia.
Yeah.
A, there's the visa issues, but B, some of our guys have got young families, and it's probably not practical for them to just go and leave home for 9 months or 12 months. So that's the area we're finding that is a bit more challenging. And and as you say, one course is sort of leading to the next, and we've got a couple of other opportunities at the moment that are new courses, and so just trying to assemble that crew. And golf is booming in America. Golf, like here, there's a lot of projects on the go. So finding good guys is the challenge at the moment. But hopefully we can develop those relationships, because it feels like probably 50% of our business will be based in America, certainly in the next 5 to 7 years. But it may well, hopefully, it continues on well after that.
What's more fun, build from scratch or a restoration renovation? Is there if you could pick one or the other, and I'm sure there's pluses and minuses, do you have a favorite with your guys' firm that you would rather do in a perfect world?
I think in a perfect world, you're doing the new build, just because, you're able to, it's kind of, you're able to fully express all your, design ideas, I guess. You're not inheriting anything. And we take a very holistic view to all of our courses. We kind of like to be involved with everything that's going to affect the look or the play of the holes. It's not just It's not just everything within the fairway shape and the green shape. We're looking at the overall property, and we like trying to create that experience and that feel. So I think a new course where you're basically helping plan the entire facility as well as the design. You're looking at how golfers are getting into the site, other features, short courses, practice facilities, where the clubhouse is located, just how that whole thing works, and then getting right down into the nitty-gritty of the actual design of the course and building it. So I would say new, but we have done a lot of renovation work, particularly in Australia, and it's nice too. I mean, we quite like looking at the history of golf courses. We obviously have a lot of reverence for the great old architects of yesteryear, and even if it's not a pure restoration, it is still interesting looking back and seeing how the course has evolved and seeing why it's got to the point where it's at. That was one of the interesting things at Medinah. We're very fortunate to have some really good historical records there. So we've got some great aerials, great plans, and we were able to overlay Bendelau's original design onto the current layout and kind of see how it's evolved to this point. We found some really interesting documents from, it appears Tillinghast was involved there in the 30s, but no one can really determine to what extent. But when we overlaid the aerial and drew the outline of the bunkers, it's quite clear that the original bunker shape. I mean, these were some really bold, interesting shaped bunkers, kind of all the hallmarks of the Golden Age. Wider fairways, more fairway back towards the tee. It was a very interesting golf course, and so even though it's not a pure restoration, there's probably a third of the golf course we're looking at restoring elements. There's a couple of holes, 3 and 4, we're kind of putting back the original bunkers. Because the fourth hole there, which kind of the second shot plays up the hill, the hill there, the second half of that hole was just smothered with bunkers up left and right. I mean, it must have been an incredibly good looking hole. And, we found reports in the 40s where they were at a Greens Committee level, because of the war, they were trying to cut costs. And so there was a suggestion to just start filling in bunkers. And so that's what they did. So, but I find that very interesting to be able to kind of piece together, well, this is what you had and this is why it changed. It was no one's fault. I mean, no one was doing it. They were doing it in the best interest of the club. But then, generations pass by and no one remembers that. No one knows that. I find that a very interesting part of our job, just kind of trying to fit the pieces together again.
So Mr. Bendelow had some pretty good ideas back in the day of, let's make a really great golf course. It's kind of interesting. You go back and you can kind of tip your hat to him from what it sounds like and go, well done, sir. That was a well-designed golf hole.
Absolutely.
100 years ago or 90 years ago, whatever it may be at this point.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of, it's almost divided into thirds, I would say, the course. Like there's kind of a third of the course where we are looking to restore elements. There's a third where we're sort of retaining existing holes and tweaking them, kind of holes like 12, for instance, just kind of essentially keeping the fundamentals of the hole, but just making some tweaks. And then there's 6 holes that are kind of a major departure from what they've got. And that's kind of the last 6 holes really from 13 through to 18 where we're rerouting the holes.
Well, best of luck with this project, and congratulations. It's such an iconic club, and you guys must be doing a lot right for that club to give you the nod for that project. It is that golf course is Chicago. Outside Chicago, we have a lot of pride in that golf course. It's it's held our majors. It's iconic. So what a cool project to get to work on. So we're definitely rooting for you to kind of get the vision.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, where you guys want to get. I'm sure you guys will do a great job. Like, your work speaks for itself. So thank you so much for coming on. And like I said, looking forward to seeing that project and seeing what you guys can do with it. It's exciting stuff.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me.